Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all of you for joining us. It's not in any way the same as sitting in the red leather seats in the council chamber, and I'm sorry that we're not able to sort of get together. So it's not quite the same, but as Andrew said, we do want to answer a lot of questions in the time after roughly about half of the time on the presentation and the sharing of information, which I hope you'll find of value. If you do have any problems with the visuals, or we can please by all means raise it. But I hope that by putting your questions via the chat, we can get through as many questions as possible. So it's been a challenging year for you and for our community. This is broadly what I want to cover, along with a double act with Anna. Just a little bit about where we're at on the epidemic currently, because that's still current and big, and it's been our sort of primary focus throughout this year since late March. Then Anna will talk about particularly the community response and the wider work that we are doing on equalities, and particularly in the context of coronavirus, tackling rough sleeping and homelessness. I'll have a quick look at the council finances and our plans for 2021. And whilst tonight isn't the main session on the joint local plan, because there's a webinar which you're all very welcome to join on the 2nd of December, amongst other events, I'll cover some of the big issues that are arising out of the joint local plan, including because we published quite a lot of documents in the last week. So I hope you find this worthwhile. So the coronavirus has thrown a lot of challenges at our community. And I think the community overall has done a wonderful job of response. But I do pay tribute to the council's team. We've got about 700 staff, as well as other people who work for us. And our two core priorities have been protecting public health and helping protect the vulnerable in our city. So we've been working very closely with the County Council and the Director of Public Health there, Liz Robin. But essentially, it's been a very good partnership and working closely with Addenbrooke's and other partners, because part of it still is protecting the NHS and minimising both the cases and also the number of people who are infected of older age groups, because they're particularly at risk. So we'll cover how we've been protecting the vulnerable. Clearly, there's also been support, particularly from the County Council, for shielded vulnerable, and that goes on. Rough sleepers, mutual aid networks, community food hubs, and the efforts that the council services have taken. And during this period, we were really glad that Antoinette Jackson, our Chief Executive, stayed on longer than she planned, because she essentially helped lead what was quite a big change of direction for the council. And I have to pay tribute to all our staff, frontline staff, but every one of our staff has both been doing their normal job, but also on occasions been doing significant coronavirus work, particularly in the environmental health area. And that's included work to help businesses. So just a few slides. This was just an example of just the impact on the city and just the impact on economic activity and transport. So during that period of March to May, the community responded really well. We did have a sad story in terms of care homes, and that, I think, it causes us quite a lot of grief, including people that we knew in care homes in Cambridge. And there were obviously others who suffered both illness and also, sadly, those who died. But overall, as a community, we stayed pretty safe through that period. And then we were in a position to recover in the summer. But that has not, and we never expected it to be the end. So we worked closely in the city centre. We kept the market going. It really has been a treasure for people. Open air shopping, the importance of our market and traders. We reduced car park charges because it was necessary to assist that recovery of the city centre. There's a lot of jobs, a lot of businesses that have had a challenging time, particularly because normally Cambridge in the summer relies heavily on tourism. And so we've done things like the work with the county council about changing some of the road arrangements, and we've had open air businesses. We've worked closely with the police on a lot of that work, and we've clearly been working closely with those businesses. We paid out a lot of grants to businesses, and that has enabled them to keep going. And again, there's been lockdown grants started again most recently for the hospitality businesses. So there've been significant sums of money to keep the city centre just about afloat, but we realise how difficult it is for a lot of those businesses. So back in second lockdown, and it was a little ironic because locally on that Friday when Boris Johnson was meeting Public Health England, we were also meeting locally whether or not to go into tier 2, simply because of the need to be preemptive. And as local politicians, and I know our MP Daniel Eichner takes this view, we were really keen to recognise that things were not going well and that we did need to introduce extra measures. And that's in addition to the fact that we've obviously worked on safety in the city centre, and we've worked really closely with the universities, both of them, since June. So whilst it is concerning some of the cases in the university, there's some specific issues involved in that, and the level of testing by both universities, particularly the University of Cambridge, and their clear isolation policies mean that they've contained the virus. So just as an example, our recent issues have largely been 18 to 24-year-olds, and the clusters have included several colleges, but we've also had clusters of our own, and some linked to colleges, schools, but generally the majority of cases in Cambridge in October were 18 to 24-year-olds. And then we've had different clusters. So one of the purposes of Test, Track and Trace has been to actually work out exactly what's been happening. And each of these cases is followed through. Assisted by my friend and statistician, Phil Rogers, this is the sort of one of the latest diagrams, which just gives you a picture of some of the issues in the city. And I'll show another picture in a minute. It does underline the fact that, particularly because it's had near 100% testing, the majority of the cases in the city have been in the wards that have got colleges. And that has been largely colleges of the university, but you'll see also here there's been, and we trace some of this to the week before lockdown, there's also been a rise in cases in Romsey. So all the way through since October, there's been very careful monitoring on a daily basis, but particularly looking at where are the cases and tracing them down. And I just cut this off a website. So it literally is a case that you can see the Cambridge data in terms of coronavirus cases with a 3-day lag on this national website. And I guess several of you know about that. But what this broadly says is that we've had quite a seesaw of up and down data, and we are making progress, but we can't really predict what the next couple of weeks will bring. So one of my threads is that I don't see us coming out of lockdown easily on the 2nd of December. I do see the need for us to have precautions. We are working very closely with the universities in terms of what happens in the last week. And we do need to be assured by government that returning students who are part of families in Cambridge are actually given advice and clarity before they return, and that we don't see another spike before Christmas. In terms of Addenbrooke's, broadly the picture has been good. They are now having a number of patients. They're largely from outside Cambridge. The information last Friday was that there were 35 Addenbrooke's beds allocated to coronavirus, but that includes a range of cases, and it's not the same level of intensity that Addenbrooke's had to deal with, along with Papworth at the peak. But nevertheless, we need to keep a careful eye on that, because we clearly, the two vital threads, in addition to the number of cases, are the number of older people who are contracting the disease. And I'm glad to say that numbers in Cambridge are still low, and the number of hospital cases. And Addenbrooke's is taking cases from outside of Cambridgeshire, as well as from areas outside of Cambridge. So the number of Cambridge people in Addenbrooke's currently is low. Testing and vaccination, we're grateful. We've now got an Abbey Pool testing facility. We've had a pilot for testing rough sleepers. Each of the counties really around us has now got fast response testing, and that's partly because they've got higher infections of over 65s. And there will be vaccination starting, we believe, before Christmas, and that will start with NHS and care staff, and then also cover over 85s. So, as I said, test, track and trace is really vital. And after a trial in Peterborough, we're now going to roll out a much more detailed way of test, track and trace, including greater input from our environmental health team from later this week. And it does mean that we've got greater certainty. Nationally, track and trace was only achieving about 65% for a while, and in Cambridgeshire it's currently around 85%, and we want to get that higher because it is important. And it's also important that we ensure that people do isolate when they need to. So I'm going to hand over to Anna, and we'll take some questions after Anna's contribution. So Anna's our deputy leader, and Anna's been leading on the community response, as well as being executive councillor for communities. Over to you, Anna, and I'll just be slide sharer for a while.
Yeah, thank you, Lewis. Can you all hear me? I guess Andrew will tell me if I can't be heard. So I'm afraid that we're going to have to do a slight impersonation of a number 10 press conference here, because Lewis is controlling the slides. So there is going to be a bit of next slide, please, going through this. I hope that's the only similarity with a number 10 press conference. So Lewis, thank you. One of the things that we're doing as a city is to try and think of our key priorities for supporting people during COVID-19. So as Lewis has mentioned, we're looking at testing and prevention, working with the universities on that. We're looking at tackling irresponsible behaviour. We're looking at getting the message out. We're also looking at supporting those most at risk, so supporting individuals, supporting communities, and that's the area that I've been working on most closely. And just in case I forget later on, there are so many thank yous, not least to our fabulous team and to all the wonderful volunteers, community partners and businesses we've been working with. I'm sure I'll say that again in the next 10 minutes, but I wanted to get it in there now, just in case I forgot. So Lewis, if you go on to the next slide, please. I wanted to set just a little bit of context. As many of you will know from previous presentations, this really is a very divided city. It's the most unequal city in the UK for income. We've got an almost 10-year life expectancy gap between the most and the least deprived areas of Cambridge. We're in the lowest 20% of local authorities for social mobility. We've got over, and this was back in 2017, over 13,500 people living in households claiming housing benefits, 1 person in 10, that is. So it's really a very divided city, and was a divided city before the pandemic. And if we go on to the next slide, very much the pandemic has exacerbated those things. It's definitely made it worse. You will be aware that many people who face the greatest deprivation have a higher risk of exposure to coronavirus because of the jobs they do, which also means there's a greater risk of getting ill, maybe, let's hope not, but for even mortality. We've certainly seen an increased use of food banks. We've seen more people with state benefits. We've seen an increased use of food hubs. And we've really seen a rise in digital poverty too. There are so many people in this world where computers have become vital. There are so many households who have been relying on a small mobile phone, a poor internet connection. So we've really seen inequality get worse in many ways, and we've had to think about how we respond to that. And on to the next slide. we've been absolutely privileged in this city to be working with a really amazing group of mutual aids, community organisations, faith groups, so many people who have been part of a structure that our officers have helped set up, but it's been very much a partnership as we try to support our community. And I know there are people here tonight who are absolutely at the centre of that. And that's been about everything from neighbourly help and volunteering in food hubs, which I'll say a little bit more in a minute, as well as signposting and support to specialist services. And we've had a fantastic team who have been staffing email and phone support lines, which have been able to really get help to people who need it. We've distributed money to kickstart community action. We've got over 1,500 volunteers. We had 1,700 households supported in the last lockdown. The numbers really are huge, and it's been the effort of so many people in this room and so many people beyond this room. So on to the next slide, please. I just want to highlight a couple of key things. Firstly, that we are part of the Cambridge Food Poverty Alliance. We have a food poverty action plan. We're working together. I don't know if you can quite see some of the images there, but it's a huge range of partners, including Cambridge Sustainable Food, including Food Cycle, including the Food Bank, CHS, so many groups as part of that. And if I didn't read you out, it's only for reasons of time. It's a really important group. And as part of that, what we've been working on is developing a network of food distribution hubs. And here's a lovely picture of Sam and Alex, actually from before the pandemic, because this was something we always knew we needed to work on. And we felt, talking together with community groups and as a council, that the real missing link was the ability to get leftover food to people who needed it. So we'd started to talk about finding a venue and funding and supporting a central food hub. And really that kind of, we talked about trialing that. The trial kicked off before we had expected it because of the coronavirus pandemic. So currently we've deployed 2.5 full-time council staff to Cambridge Sustainable Food who are coordinating the food poverty effort. We had help from various fantastic organisations at the height of the lockdown, cooking and distributing meals. And most recently, we were using Cambridge Regional College when they needed to take their kitchens back because they were reopening. We've been able to repurpose Buchan Street Neighbourhood Centre for that. And we now also have a range of micro food hubs across the city, which you can go to without an appointment, without a token, which complement the fantastic range of food banks that are already in place. Now, this next slide, not expecting you to be able to read, it's deliberately tiny just to show the amount that's out there. Every day apart from Sunday, there is something going on in the city to provide food to people that need it. And that's hugely powerful. And thank you so much to everyone who's been part of that, including, if we go on to the next slide, the work of our completely amazing volunteers. And you can see the numbers there, they really speak for themselves and they're going up all the time. 113 tonnes of food redistributed, 10,000 cooked meals prepared and delivered, 11,000 volunteer hours, 17,000 visits to our food hubs across the city. It's been an amazing volunteer effort and also an amazing effort from our local businesses too. And I just want to say thank you to them as well, because particularly in our push to try and deal with the issues of holiday hunger, they've just stepped up so much and it has been an enormous city effort. So if we can just go on to the next slide. Thanks to Councillor Collis for putting together just a really nice infographic here, which puts that together in a different way and just shows in a visual way the amount of work that's gone on in this community. And thank you to so many people in this room. So if we could go on to the next slide, please, because we need to do this work building on our existing anti-poverty priorities. So there's other work that's happening that complements this effort and adds to it. So we're still focusing on expanding the real living wage. That's now £9.50 an hour. We're very rare in the city, in the country, in having a living wage officer who supports that. We have retained almost £1 million in targeted community organisation grants. We also have homelessness prevention grants. We're building council homes. I know Lewis will say more about that later, I think. And we're doing a lot of work with the homeless. We have an anti-poverty strategy. I've mentioned the food distribution hub, and we're really trying to target the areas and the communities that we know are most in need. And if you look at the next slide, many of you will be familiar with this, but this is just to emphasize really where the deprivation in terms of the most concentration in particular neighbourhoods is happening through the city. And you can see a real focus there in what's on the north of that map. And we really are trying to focus our efforts in the places that need our help most. That's really what it's about. And to do that in a way that's in partnership with people, we are very keen not to just go in and tell people what they need, but actually to ask them. It's also worth mentioning what we're doing in partnership with our local businesses. We're really trying to improve the work that we do in that area. I'm going to talk briefly about the bottom first, actually, which is the corporate volunteering, because too often in the past that has simply been companies want to have volunteers, they want to take part, and you get, oh great, come and do a litter pick, which is fabulous. But we want to try to really hone in on that, and we've been working with CCVS to come up with a project called Making Connections, a report that's trying to think about how we can get businesses to be more focused in the support and the volunteering they give. We're continuing our Real Living Wage campaign. I think now, probably more than ever, it's vital that we are paying as much as possible. Businesses are paying a real living wage at least, because poverty is on the rise at this current time. We're also encouraging businesses to make donations, not simply of money, although they have done that incredibly generously in large numbers to the Coronavirus Fund, but also old IT equipment to the Cambridge Digital Partnership to ensure that people have the equipment at home that they need. And also, as I've mentioned, food, time, resources to tackle food poverty. And again, I would also want to mention there some of the chefs who basically took a busman's holiday when they were on furlough and worked as chefs for the Food Hub, which was incredibly welcome, and also ended up with, I believe, a bit of a competition amongst the chefs to see who could do the most ambitious meals that went out. So there were some really fantastic foods I saw on Instagram. So if we can just go on to the next slide, Lewis, this is just a reminder of the real living wage rates as they stand currently. That's £9.50 across the UK, £10.85 in London. I'm sure you're all familiar with this, but this is what the Real Living Wage Foundation feel is the baseline to live on. It's not a kind of luxury rate, it's the baseline. Just also wanted to mention some of the work that is happening to try and help families at Christmas. Working with Cambridge Sustainable Food and the food banks, we're looking to deliver Christmas hampers, fresh produce. I think that should say family games and not game, but there we are, to get parcels let out. It's a nice diversity there. We really would like people to donate food hampers, finances, gifts, volunteer. So please do consider if you or anyone you know could give that a little bit of visibility, that would be brilliant. So just moving on, please, Lewis. Wanted to mention just a little bit about what's happening to support rough sleepers. We've done everything we can to assume that nobody's had to be homeless out on the streets during the lockdowns. So 170 people have been in temporary accommodation since March. Around about 75 of those people have now moved into longer term accommodation, which is really great news. We've still got 60 people in emergency accommodation, and we are always finding new venues, new places that we can put people up to support people. And we're really hoping this becomes a way of people being able to be helped into something that's more long term. We're working in partnership. You slightly preempted me there, Lewis, but I will keep. That's a big reveal, but we'll leave that up now because we're working in partnership with Hill and with Jimmy's and Alia has produced some of these as well. And these are the modular housing for homelessness. These fantastic little, sometimes they're called pods, but they're these tiny micro homes that are there to provide move-on accommodation for people. And we're really very excited about those. I drove past the Alia pods the other day on a rare car trip out of the house, and it was so exciting to see. So very, very excited about some of the things that's happening. And we've identified in our partnership with Hill, 17 one-bedroom pod homes on council land with 3 sites that we hope to have handover June 2021, which is really very exciting. So thank you to everybody there. And if we could just move on to the next slide, please. Wanted to just flag up to you again, you'll probably know this, but we have a consultation on a new homelessness strategy. Please do contribute to that. Please do tell everyone you know to contribute to that. This is so important that we really want to make sure that everybody who has something to say is saying it. So Lewis, thank you. On to the next slide. Now this one is a little bit like when you're a teacher and you say spot the deliberate mistakes. In this case, it's spot the things that are missing, of which there are many. So we've got a few partners here, but I'm sure many people are looking at that and thinking, oh, well, I can't see Jimmy's, I can't see Winter Comfort, I can't see Alia, I can't see the CCVS. This is an example only of some of the partners that we're working with. It's an image that we put in just to say, there are so many partners, so many people that without whom we could not do the work we do. This is a team effort in Cambridge. And I think, yes, we shouldn't, there's always more we can do, but we should be very proud as a community, as partnerships of the work that we are doing, because we really are delivering for communities. So I just have 2 more slides. Also in my remit is our wider work on equalities. And just to point out some of the many things that we're doing, a lot of what we do revolves around awareness events, remembrance events, and also celebratory events. So we had the first South Asian History Month that took place entirely online this year. We also support Black History Month, LGBT+ History Month. We run a range of other events, and we run a commemoration each year for Holocaust Memorial Day. We do a lot of work supporting refugees in the city. We promote safety initiatives, safer spaces campaigns, really trying to do what we can to address issues of hate crime and violence. We have recently been accredited for our work supporting victims of domestic abuse. There's funding available. If you don't know about that and you want to, please do ask more. We're able to point you to our officers for that. We provide training both for our staff and our counsellors, and it's all underpinned by our single equality scheme. And what we hope we do in that is that we're not smug or complacent, that it's really about trying to find the things we need to do better and making sure we do those. So we're always looking to try to improve and ensure, if I can go on to my final slide, Lewis, that this equality pledge is something that we take seriously. This was written in Cambridge, connected with one of the very first LGBT History Months nationally that was held in Cambridge, and the organisers of that wrote this pledge. And before we go to questions, I just wanted to read it out because I think it's so powerful in terms of what we're trying to do to create one Cambridge. So we believe in the dignity of all people and their right to respect and equality of opportunity. We value the strength that comes with difference and the positive contribution that diversity brings to our community. Our aspiration is for Cambridge and the wider region to be safe, welcoming, and inclusive. And we'll keep holding to that as strongly as we can. So that's just a very brief run through of a lot of things. And what we're going to do now is pause for questions on this area and on the material that Lewis was covering at the beginning. There will be more time for questions at the end. So we're just going to focus questions on those topics now, and there'll be another Q&A at the end for the material that Lewis will be covering. So, Andrew, I think you're going to be emceeing this.
Okay, thanks, Anna. So we said at the outset, invited people to put questions in the chat. And we already had a couple of questions submitted that Anna was going to answer from David Webb and Sam Davis. And Sam's got in again with a question in the chat. So well done, Sam, for kicking the ball off. And I'll read it out, and I think maybe Anna would like to answer. So the question is, our work in Queen Edith has really heightened awareness of the experience of disadvantaged people living in what is widely perceived to be a more affluent area. The particular impact of this form of disadvantage has been identified in research, and there's a web link to a New Scientist article there. What can the City Council do within the framework of its anti-poverty strategy to make sure that these people are not even more disadvantaged?
Thanks, Sam, and that's just a really important thing to mention. I mean, I I think, you know, I used to be a deputy head in a small group of secondary schools. And one of the things we always used to notice there was that actually it could be harder to be a child on free school meals if you were in an affluent class than if you were in a class with a lot of other children on free school meals. Sometimes the division seemed much bigger. I think what I'd want to emphasize is that we're using our focus on, yes, areas that have great need. That doesn't mean we're not trying to focus also on individuals that have need elsewhere. So it's always got to be that balance. That's the short answer. I can go into more detail on that, but thank you. That's an important thing to ask me to confirm, because it's not that we're trying to pull all support from anywhere else.
Okay, well, I'd encourage everyone to keep asking your questions in the chat function, but in the absence of any others, Anna, did you want to answer the questions that have been submitted in advance by David and Sam?
I did. Now I'm just slightly slowing down because I had all my notes up and they've all crashed. So I'm just pulling that up again. But I'm going to go, I think, for, yes, sorry about this. Could you read out the Safer Spaces question, please, Andrew, just while I'm pulling this up so that I don't.
Yes, you're now expecting me to be able to find it as well. Okay. So David's question this is David Webb from the Encompass Network. Thank you for the question, David. David asked, given the increasing incidence of hate crimes towards the LGBT+ community, both locally and nationally, especially aimed at the trans community, what practical assistance can the council offer to the community to create spaces where the community can meet in safety, as there are no specific LGBT+ spaces in Cambridge, despite there being some in places such as Peterborough and Norwich?
Thanks for that. And yeah, I mean, the rise in hate crime is just shocking across the country. It's something, as you'll be aware, that we talked about in our motion the other week, and it's just, it needs addressing, absolutely. So, I mean, you'll be aware that we're part of the Safer Spaces campaign. I think one of the things that I would say about that is it's a fantastic campaign. We need to make sure, however, that there are more venues that are part of that. So, you know, when you look at the list, we've got a good long list, but a lot of those are shops and offices, which is fantastic, but we need to build on that venue as well. We are trying to do as much as we can with our community centres. So we are delivering Safer Spaces training to our community centres so that those can become places that are as safe as possible for a wide variety of groups to meet. I'd like to chat further, to be honest. I think it would be really good to kind of talk about what we could do next for that, because I'm very aware that over time, the different needs for LGBT+ venues have changed. So in lots of ways, there's no longer the kind of need to be in a social venue for the sake of just the socialising, because there's a lot of broader socialising now, but that issue of safety and wanting to be in a safe space is still absolutely vital. So if we could make sure that we talk after this, I'd be really grateful, and we can see how we can get that moved on.
Okay, thank you. There's a comment from Philippa Slatter in the chat, which I don't think is a question, but if I've got that wrong, Philippa, please do kind of put something in there that if you want to ask a question. But there's a question from Nikki Shepherd, which again, I think is for you, Anna. So the food hubs have been working well across the city, but in some areas of great need, like Abbey, the funding to keep these going is not secure through this financial year. What will the City Council be doing to ensure funding is in place to keep the food hubs open while need continues to rise?
Alex, you're on the call, aren't you? Are you able to come in on the specifics of that funding issue for me? Alex is our anti-poverty lead councillor.
Yes, so we're working with Sam Dyer at Cambridge Sustainable Food to get a sort of robust funding strategy in place. The idea for the food hubs is a move away from emergency food towards a sort of a system where everybody is able to make sustainable food choices, regardless of their income. I've talked to several people, and I think, Sam, you may well have done too, in the queue at the Cherry Hinton Food Hub, where I'm based, saying actually what they come for is the fresh food and the surplus food, and they really value being able to sort of take part in that. So Yes, in terms of the funding, I mean, it does cost a huge amount to run the food hubs. All the food hubs, as you know, at the moment are having discussions about what they want their future to look like, what model they want to run. Once we have a clearer picture of that, we'll be working with Cambridge Sustainable Food on how we fund that.
And just to come in on that as well, we are expecting news next week of a central government grant for winter support, which we hope will allow some more funding out to the hubs in the short to medium term. No information has come through as yet and how that's going to operate. So we are waiting with some level of bated breath for the information on that. But Alex is absolutely right. And actually, again, going back to pre-pandemic, the last thing I did before lockdown was I went to Brownsfield to kind of officially open a community fridge there. And that model of having available food for everybody that is sustainable and freely available is something we were working on prior to the pandemic. So it's trying to kind of scale that up and get that to the right levels as soon as we can, so that this no longer becomes a kind of emergency response.
Okay, thank you. There's no more questions in the chat, but Anna, do you want to take Sam's pre-submitted question now, and then we can go back to Lewis for the rest of the presentation? So have you got it up, or would you like to read it out?
Would it be easier if I summarise it, because it was...
Yeah.
So Sam, would it be fair, this is really about kind of how do we support not-for-profits and other groups in getting access to premises, isn't it? Would that be a decent summary?
Yes.
Brilliant. Right. I mean, so we try to do what we can to work with groups to kind of be an advocate. We'd also want to try and be an advocate in terms of taking the funding pots that are available. And I know that those funding bids aren't always successful, but we will keep supporting on the next ones and the next ones as much as we can. You mentioned a specific case in terms of an unused catering kitchen near to you, and I know that officers are looking into that, and I can put you in touch with officers to talk about that further if that would be helpful. Where we can, we stepped in with our own resources as well. But yes, I mean, I appreciate, and I know one of the things that's underpinning what you're asking is that we've got facilities that kind of want their pre-COVID life back, and won't necessarily be able to offer the same level of, say, food storage, food preparation that they're doing now. So that would be kind of my shorter answer to that. I know officers are currently working as well with Food Cycle to try to support them in finding some facilities for the work that they're doing. We will keep doing what we can to support is the short answer to that. I wish we had loads of council properties that were freely available to hand out. They're not. But we will do what we can to help try and find things, because we need to work together on this.
Andrew, there was one further question that was just a one-to-one from Heather Duquesne, which is, are rough sleepers being accommodated during second lockdown? What will happen over Christmas? So in addition to what Anna described, we've taken control of a large unit of accommodation in the north of the city with over 60 bedrooms. It's very modern as well. So we've got significant capacity, which is much better than the hotel offer that we had during the first lockdown. So we're committed, not just during the epidemic, but on an ongoing basis, to a radically better offer, working with all of the excellent charities in the city to rough sleepers. So yeah, every rough sleeper who wants accommodation, and those that need it, particularly in the colder weather, will be given it, and it will be of a better standard than has been possible before. Anna mentioned some further additions through next year. So there should not be rough sleepers over Christmas, and it's still important that people, if you come across people who are sleeping rough, if you just check how they are, say hello. And if you do note them and they look like they need some support, even if it's just to check that they're all right, we want people to ring our general number, which is on the website. There's a number for our street outreach team. So I think we can get to a better place. It's not simple for the people involved, but we're determined with the partnerships with people like It Takes a City to give people pathways and to help people rebuild their lives. So I think there's not good in an epidemic, but we are determined that there's going to be a different intervention level on rough sleepers and homeless people. And that included quite a lot of people who are loosely called sofa surfers and others. There's quite a lot of people that we uncovered during the first lockdown that really were homeless, but were just not visible. So we will continue to give a big focus to homelessness. So if there are other questions, very happy to pick them up if people want to add them, Andrew, at the end.
Yeah.
Shall I just briefly pick up Mark's one on space? Would that be helpful?
Well, there's one from the Zero Din as well about BME communities, but I'd suggest we get on with the rest of the presentation now, and we'll come back to Nazir's question as the first one after that, if that's okay. So, Lewis, if you want to share your screen again.
Try my limited technological skills. Okay. So, as I said before, I want to cover a bit about our funding position and priorities for next year, and then a few themes looking ahead, particularly the local plan, given the amount of material that's been shared this week. So we are not a council that heavily relies on the government anymore, and we also rely significantly on the amount of money that we generated as income, and a lot of that has been severely dented during the epidemic. So you can see there roughly the figures. Overall, as a business, as an organisation, we have a turnover of about £100 million. 40 million is paid for in council rents to us, and is a self-funding amount of money for housing. And then along with other things, we've got about 50, 60 million, including our capital expenditure that's largely funded these days out of council tax and out of locally generated income. And when people pay their council tax, 11% goes to the city council. The vast bulk, not unsurprisingly, goes to the county because they've got adult care, childcare, and transport, and then chunks to the police and to fire and rescue. So just as a bit of an indication, this just shows you some of the split of our spend, but it just shows you some of the largest budgets that we actually spend in terms of looking after the city. So in terms of the environment, we spend in the region of a bit over 6 million on open spaces and on keeping the streets clean. We've obviously got responsibilities for recycling and waste. We've got a significant budget, as Anna's opened up, in terms of anti-poverty and also in terms of communities. And aspects like the Corn Exchange, which has had to close, and the swimming pools and recreation centres, which have had to close temporarily, we hope. And then we've got a back room that does a lot in terms of the whole range of people looking after our property. And we do continue to spend a significant sum on not just homelessness, but a whole range of special housing needs and the private sector. And if you look at our planning costs about 5 million if you look at all of the work, but that also includes things like our parks and recreation areas, which have been so valuable in the last period. And then we've got a whole range of other facilities and services, including working with the police on community safety, as well as spending money on transport ourselves. We do have a big financial challenge, and we had this anyway before. So that was one of the reasons why we built up a chunk of reserves, because we knew that despite the fact that government talks about sort of reviewing funding and making it fairer funding, every time I hear someone saying it's a fair funding review, I go straight to the door, worried that it's going to hurt us again. So at the moment, we are going to need to use a chunk of our reserves, but we are going to need to change the way that we run a number of the services, and there will be changes, some of which have been accelerated by coronavirus simply because we've got to do things differently. And over the county as a whole, it was identified, if you look at the red square, a sum of about 32 million. That is the gap that isn't being funded by government. So it's all very well some ministers coming on and saying we're being so generous to councils, but that isn't the case for us. And similarly, we're 7.6 million short unless they give us a share of our lost income. And I think our figure for next year is 3 or 4 million short as well. So if we have got deployable reserves in the city, they're going to be used up. And we do need to continue to respond to the epidemic, as well as address homelessness, inequality, and the future. So our overall priorities are to continue that work on those themes, but we're also increasing the amount of action and work that we do on the climate emergency and in achieving net zero carbon in the future. And we've continued to maintain services despite changes and reductions in funding. So just to cover a few themes, and then we can perhaps just answer some of the questions that we've got on planning and related issues. We are the most expensive place apart from Oxford and London. So it is the fact that people who are younger and a whole range of people in Cambridge cannot afford to buy in the city, which is a tragedy, really. And in response, that's why we're focused on affordable rent. So we've got as a central part of our council activity, as well as investing, because we put our money into a number of investable sites, as well as getting money from government and other sources. We're building 540 council homes, and despite the epidemic, that programme is going well. So we've already completed some smaller schemes, including the one on the right at Anstey Way, which is an example of some of the quality of the build. And these units are good inside, and we are also providing some of these units for people who are homeless, what we call housing first, where we're moving people in a supported way. And I mean, I'm passionate about council housing, including that we were managed to get £70 million out of a government that isn't particularly sympathetic. And we did at a site like Mill Road Depot have a big opportunity. And it was right that we've also invested in it, including some market homes, so that pays for the council housing, and it also helps the council's finances. So we're not just building homes here, we're also building a community and linking with the community nearby. And there will be good public spaces, and there will be a community facility there. And just a mile or so away, on the other side of the railway line, we spent a significant sum of money to buy this site. It was previously Ridgeons, and now it's called Timberworks. And again, it does two jobs. It delivers the new council housing that we're committed to, and a nursery and an even better public space than was feasible at Mill Road. But it's part of our financial planning of protecting services by investment. And we've been prudent and careful about our investments, as with aspects like the redevelopment of Park Street car park, but it really does protect services. Briefly on climate change, it is a reality, and whatever we might think about things across in America, it is very important that we have leadership from America and that all of the world is working on this. Some of these issues, yes, they are addressable in Britain, but they are only resolvable by things like the Paris Declaration and people working together. So if you just take Cambridge, this is the split, and it underlines the fact that as with the other issues that Anna talked about, addressing anti-poverty and homelessness, we really cannot achieve net zero in Cambridge unless everybody's part of it. So we've been working very closely through a sort of group that's been meeting frequently with industry and the university and looking at their carbon emissions. We're clearly looking to have a transformation in the way that people move about. And we underline the fact that domestic properties, all of us where we live, our reliance on fairly damaging single gas boilers everywhere generates an awful lot of emissions. So as a city, we've got to make a dramatic change, and we've all got to sign up to net zero. So the City Council's cut its emissions by over 25%. We're certainly in the next 1,000 council homes looking at a very different design, and we've recently approved one development of council housing which has got no gas at all. So we're looking at radical changes. We've got a citywide strategy that we'd welcome everybody's input into. I think there's another workshop on that this week, and we've got electric charging coming in, including in our car parks, and we've got a new council vehicle strategy which will switch towards electric and switch away from diesel. So please have a look at the climate change strategy. We really do all have to own this, and we are, over the course of the next year, particularly when we come out of lockdown, going to be doing an awful lot of joining up and a lot of local workshops, including in different parts of the city. And it is a partnership with all of you and the work that you do as groups within our city. And because it's on a bigger geography, it is important that the combined authority's got an initiative and it's doing the work, including because we've got such a carbon risk issue of the fen area of the county, and because a number of the changes that we need to achieve have to be done on a bigger geography. And then I also urge people to sign up to the climate charter that we've created and have a look at this part of the website, because what we've got to do over the next year is basically develop that joint work both across the city but also in local areas. I'll cover a few parts of the local plan. This isn't wholly about the plan today. I know that we've got Councillor Katie Thornborough on the call, who's our Executive Councillor for Planning, and also Stephen Kelly, who leads for us and is Director of the Joint Planning Service. So this motif, which was part of the earlier consultation, sums up that we are ambitious about our next plan, and ambitious that it meets the needs of our area. We're ambitious that it's going to work towards net zero, that it recognises that we do have to double biodiversity across our geography, as well as address inequalities. So we will continue to look at how we do that. I'm not expecting you to sort of take all of this in, but I think what it's about is just to underline that this is a process that's going to take several years. So we're not rushing. And the publication of the material this week, which people can find online, is a sort of big stage, because it will inform further workshops, including one on the 2nd of December, where people can find out a lot more. And it won't be until next year that there will be a preferred options proposal. As someone who trains planners outside of Cambridgeshire, I just know that how much work needs to go on to get this right and effectively build on the local plan that we've already got, because that in itself is going to deliver significant amount of new housing, including when we get to it in northeast Cambridge, and also in the areas of Waterbeach, of Northstowe and Cambourne. In Cambridge, quite a lot of the current local plan sites have already been built. So I know some of you have already had a good look at some of the documents, and we'll make sure that in the workshop in December we go through further. We have produced a whole range of assessments, and there's some very important documents for the future of the city about climate change, biodiversity, inequality, quality of build. We do have to build better, and affordable housing, and just the range of employment. We have to continue to be a community that has a full range of employment, albeit that we've obviously got some very strong growth sectors. So if you look at the documents, if you looked at the earlier consultation, there needs to be an assessment about, well, where is the most sustainable place and what is the best pattern of growth. And I just reference this just to remind people who might have had a look at that. We're looking at biodiversity, and I'm showing this because it was really useful to get a group of people led here by Katie Thornborough to have a look at the fact that we really do need to protect and enhance the chalk streams and Cam. We need to look at more trees. We need to look at the opportunities of the Fen Edge to the north of the city. We do need to be better at building on biodiversity. And that is one of the key messages that's come out of the work that we've done. It overlaps into this, and that is this phrase at the beginning, that we cannot take any more from the chalk aquifer. So effectively, that was one of the messages of this study, which is definitely worth a read. And that, yes, we can do better on water efficiency, and we needed to do that anyway. But we just need to look at more sustainable use of that resource. And any regional capacity increases are going to take time. So growth needs to balance, not just with the needs for net zero carbon, but for the future of water and wastewater. And there are wider documents, and I'm borrowing an overhead that our friend Phil Rogers shared, and thanks for people who are sharing images, because I do think some of these at least lead people into some of the wider documents. And this just shows that location's a pretty critical factor in achieving net zero in the future. So it's a central part of making sure that our future local plan is sustainable. And without wanting to overburden, there's a lot more work being done. And so there's a range of work on almost every aspect that you would think of in terms of the next plan. And I do urge you just to have a look at the website. And if you want to find out more, 6 o'clock, Wednesday, the 2nd of December. Briefly, I'll just touch a bit on transport, because I do think we want to try and get benefits from that we've had of clean air during the epidemic, and we want to retain that. We do need to tackle transport and obviously invest in higher quality public transport, as well as more cycling, and generally just reduce the space that cars take up in our city. So this was just an overhead, and we'll be sharing the whole presentation. So you'll be able to have a look at a graphic like this better. But it just showed some of the things that we were actually achieving during that period of lockdown. And we do want to capture that benefit of cleaner air, as well as safety returns, to ensure that both public transport is improving, but also we retain the space for cycling and walking. And I do believe that it's to the benefit of Cambridge and the wider community that we build a network. We need Cambridge South Station to be completed. We need to build on the fact that we've got good high quality public transport routes to St Ives and to Trumpington that can be further improved with different vehicles and different ways of using those routes. And I do believe that we need the 4 further routes that the Greater Cambridge Partnership is working on, which could potentially be part of Cam Metro, but which need to help us in the 2020s as well as the 2030s. So those 4 routes, with some controversy to Cambourne, the route out to Babraham from Addenbrooks, the current consultations, which I urge people to look at on what's called Eastern Access. We so need to improve Newmarket Road, but also just provide a long-term option of people to be able to get easily in and out from the east by public transport, and also one that links the top end of Milton Road and Cambridge North area out towards Waterbeach, given that the hostile environment of the roundabout, which is the A10 crossing the A14. So we will continue to work with the Combined Authority and others to secure the right kind of improvements, including to rail. So I hope that was useful, and I'll basically just hand back to Andrew, and I'm happy to answer questions. I've got a couple to answer from James Littlewood of Cambridge Past, Present and Futures, and also Ben Bradnack about planning and the impact of the various changes that the government's proposing. And I'll come back to those along with, but I think we'll probably start, Andrew, if there's any wider questions, and I'll get back so that we can all look at each other again. Thank you for, and I just finished just by reiterating what Anna said. I mean, we're just so lucky as a city. We're just so proud of the effort that was being put in by people over the last year, and the way that we've all worked together, and we've just made a real difference. We've stopped a lot of people being isolated. We've helped a lot of people. I know how some organisations have really been challenged, and the lack of funding and the lack of government response hasn't made it easy. But as a community, I just think over the last year, we've done a stunning job of protecting the most vulnerable and also working together. So thank you to all of the people who've joined us and for all your contributions.
Okay, thank you, Lewis, and thank you, Anna, for that. So as I said, we'd go back to the Nazir Odin's question as the first one to take in this session. And we've got about 25 minutes to go before we end tonight. So Nazir's question was, I would like to know the council initiative for protecting BAME community during COVID and after COVID. As you will be already aware, previously and currently, many Black, Asian, minority and ethnic minority frontline workers and working class people are suffering from COVID-19 and facing many challenges, being unfairly treated, radical issues, and maybe that should be racial issues, to maintain their family or personal life. Anna.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I remember sitting in a presentation quite early on in the first lockdown with absolutely shocking, devastating reports from research, national research, that outlined how much more at risk of contracting COVID-19 people from minority communities were. Absolutely shocking. It really was. That's national statistics. And so I think one of the first things to say is that there is a huge awareness of this. And our team have been working really hard to kind of go through those statistics and try and work out what some of the causes are so that we can help to work with communities to address that as part of kind of wider teams. This isn't something that one council can do by itself. But I first of all wanted to say it is shocking, and I want to just acknowledge that. Clearly as well, we've tried to acknowledge as a council our full support for the Black Lives Matters movement. Again, there's been a real highlight over the last year of how terribly still how much racism there is in society around the world. And I think we really want to show our solidarity, but virtue signalling isn't really enough. So we need to think about what we can do to do something really meaningful. So I wanted to just mention a few things that are happening at the moment to help with some of the pandemic issues. Then I'll just talk a bit more briefly about some of our wider strategies. So we've got community development workers who are working at the moment as closely as they can with communities, mosques, other groups, Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum, to try and keep in touch, to understand needs, to try and make sure we're working in a partnership here, and really trying to make sure that we're choosing people who will work in partnership and are part of local communities rather than coming in from outside and again imposing views. Cambridge Sustainable Food are working to try to pick up food poverty requests and ensuring that food is culturally appropriate in terms of the food that's being prepared. Our director, one of our strategic directors, has recently held a meeting with community representatives to try and listen to concerns and to see what we can do further, because this is a real issue. It's a real issue across the country, and we need to do as much as we can as a council to address this. And I wouldn't want to sit here and go, yeah, we got it all sorted, it's fine, because it clearly isn't. More broadly, we have a single equalities scheme, and I'd really urge you, and I can get the links sent to you. I'm not quite sure how, but I'm sure we can manage this, can't we, Andrew? To our regular updates on the single equalities scheme. We review this regularly to look at what the really significant issues are in the city that we need to work with, and then we put out regular reviews where we've set targets. What have we done about that? What do we need to do next? And what I would say is that it includes working in the community and also in our own, making sure our own house is set in order as well. And we take that very seriously in terms of representation within the staff and making sure we've not only got appropriate percentages, but we've got appropriate percentages at high levels. And one of the reasons that we had our Black Lives Matter motion in the first place was because one of the things that we knew that our own staff from minority communities wanted was for us as a group of councillors to publicly assert our commitment to that. So we really are trying to listen. We're trying to be reflective. We're always happy to hear more. Nazir, you've got my details anyway, but please do get in touch. Always happy to talk further because we have to get this sorted as well as we can.
Thank you. And if anybody's interested, there's a report from the public health team about the particular impacts of COVID on the BAME community in Cambridge, coming to the scrutiny committee in January. I think it's to the Environment Community Scrutiny Committee in January. So that'll have more detail on that. So the next question was from Mark Freeman. So thank you for this question, Mark. It says, space is a continued issue for Cambridge charities, from office space to storage. It would be good if the Section 106 funding and its replacement could be used more broadly to help voluntary organisations with all building issues.
Yeah, Section 106. Section 106 has so many rules and regulations around it. I wouldn't necessarily assume that that is probably the best way to get support that might be needed for this. But Mark, let's talk about what we could do. That's not making any promises, but we have to. I appreciate what you're saying. I know it's an issue. So let's have a conversation and see what progress we can make on this. But I wouldn't necessarily hold S106 money as being the answer, unfortunately.
Okay. Next question is from Vicky Shepherd, and I think Lewis might take this. It's what's being done as part of the climate change programme, and I think in particular the local plan process, to ensure our water supply for the city's current and future needs.
But it's a really good question. As I said, Nikki, water is a big issue, and that sort of review of water and the proposed strategy effectively says that the water is a capacity issue for the city. So we are going to need to develop proposals in terms of working with the water companies and with the Environment Agency, really just to actually be better with water anyway. So it's a pretty central theme now for the city, as well as protecting the habitat. And it was good to see the Environment Agency prosecute, for instance, people that were abstracting illegally recently. And we've just got to, it's a dual-edged issue of protecting habitat and enhancing what's been a damaged habitat. So it's a central issue. Read the strategy, and we will be following it up with further work on water. And we will be seeking greater input from Cambridge Water, Anglian Water, and the different partners, because we need to do better, and we also need to ensure that water supply in the future and wastewater is delivered net zero, and we need to work with them on that. So we already knew water was a big issue. We just now have the data and the evidence. Thanks for the question.
Okay. The next question is another local plan sustainability question. So it's from Philippa Slatter, and is, can vehicle charging points be required in new housing? Undercroft car parks are an obvious place to expect them to be installed in the future.
Well, I may just see if Stephen, if you're able to come in, but clearly it's for us to decide policies that we put into the plan. When the last plan was written, it was it went through our councils 2013 and 2014, and electric charging still wasn't on the level that we're now able to do it. Stephen, are you able to come in on this?
Thanks, Lewis. Yes, happy to comment. Obviously, it's early days in terms of policies, for the specific policies for the new local plan, but the work that we published on Monday around the implications for achieving net zero carbon and climate change points to some fairly significant policy interventions that we'll need to make, including doing everything that we can to encourage people to use vehicles that are sustainable, and obviously that picking up on future government directions are electric, 100% electric. So we would expect, I think, the local plan to incorporate policy around these types of measures, and the infrastructure work that we are doing in terms of assessing electricity capacity is also increasingly picking up on the consequences and demands that are arising from that shift to a decarbonised transport infrastructure.
So there's also those obstacles that the current central grid approach to electric doesn't take account of, either adding renewables or some of the extra demand that will put onto the electric system in parts of Cambridge, which we need to sort out too. As well as the fact that quite a number of developments, I would imagine, Stephen, are already putting in electric charging that are coming forward.
The market is in fact responding that people are asking for electric charging, not just for cars, but also bicycles and scooters and so on. And I suspect that trend will almost probably run ahead of the local plan requirements and become something of a mainstream expectation.
And places like Park Street, when we redesign Park Street as a much smaller car park, it'll have the capacity for every space potentially to be an electric charging space as well. So electric charging is growing quickly.
Good. Okay. Next, there's a kind of, I suppose it's an invitation to kind of comment, Anna, from Abdul Hai on free school meal vouchers, which may not be entirely within the City Council's gift, but is there anything you'd like to say on that? If you unmute yourself.
Yeah, I don't think I can't see that one in the chat, actually.
So Abdul's just said free school meal vouchers for eligible pupils in Cambridge.
Yeah, well, yes, really want to see that. Apologies, because we're not trying to be too political on this, but I'm going to get political for just a moment, because it's absolutely appalling that we didn't have a proper government structure put in place in half term. Absolutely terrible. I'm really proud of a lot of work that a lot of groups in the city did, including the City Council, but lots of other groups as well, to a huge effort to try to ensure that no child went hungry over half term. But it's appalling, and it shouldn't have happened. And I will keep shouting about it, and I know many other people will, until we get free school meal vouchers for children in all holidays, because it absolutely should happen. And I am going along to the Children and Young People's Committee to make exactly that point at county at the next committee there, to speak there. It has to happen. It's appalling that it doesn't. So sorry, I can't give you a yes, we can do it, but we will keep pushing for it from the authorities like the County Council and the government that should be doing it.
Thanks, Anna. The next question I can find. So thank you, Stephen, for kind of contributing and sharing the link for the 2nd of December event. That's in the chat if anybody's interested. The next question I think is from Councillor Dryden. And Councillor Dryden's asking, won't the water issues have to be dealt with before any major planning developments can get the go-ahead?
Well, Stephen might add to this, but essentially there is some capacity in the system, but essentially, but what I think was concluded was that if and there's 3 different scenarios in the documentation, a sort of stay with the current plan, a moderate growth and a higher growth, and it certainly became a challenge for the higher growth, but it doesn't rule out development. It just means that there is a capacity limit. Stephen, do you want to add something on that?
Thanks, Lewis. Yeah, I mean, I think the point when you read the report that it's making is that the current local plan developments, so the commitments and the trajectory that are contained in the current local plan, are achievable within the envelope created by the water resources management plans of Cambridge Water and others, and track with planned investment in, for example, tackling leakages and so on, so that the capacity in their licence is not exceeded. Now, I know there are ambitions to reduce abstraction from the Chalk Aquifer as well. But what that means is that the current local plan commitments and the large sites like Northstowe and Waterbeach and so on are not affected by the conclusions of the study, What the study is looking at is any additional or future growth beyond the local plan. And as Lewis correctly highlights, it raises a series of challenges for both partners and those promoting growth to overcome in terms of meeting water supply expectations from those new additional developments that will come out of any local plan.
Thanks. Andrew, I had a couple of questions which were asked in advance. One, Ben Bradnack asked about, well, what's the impact of the government's planning reforms? So we, along with South Cambridgeshire, sent back robust challenges to the government because it wasn't so much, in our view, a white paper. It was a whole hodgepodge of different changes, and there's a considerable suspicion about, well, what is the purpose? So some people, including groups challenging like Friends of the Earth and CPRE and others, dubbed it a developer's charter. So I mean, I think what we're seeing from Parliament is there's considerable resistance, including on the Tory benches and Theresa May and several others. So I don't think it will come quickly, and I don't think it will come in the form that was originally proposed. I think a lot of it is almost thought pieces without actually joining it up. So I think we crack on with running our own show and making sure that the local plan shapes it rather than national policy. So you can hold me to account if I get it wrong, but I don't think I'll be coming back in a year's time, should I be here, other than saying it's still work in progress. Simply other things have taken over, and the government made huge announcements about changing local government, and then within 3 or 4 weeks had reversed that. So so I hope that helps. I'm very happy to discuss further, and we should continue to challenge. A lot of the reforms were really badly thought through and don't join up. The other question, Andrew, was from James Littlewood, who rightly was asking, I don't know if you want to, have you got that question, or should I read it out and then answer it?
I can read it if that makes it easier on people. So James's question was, during the next 12 months, along with South Cambridgeshire, you will set out your proposals for a new local plan that will determine the amount and location of new development for the next 20 years. The lower of the proposed growth scenarios would see substantial growth, but that might be manageable without significant detriment to the city. However, the higher growth scenarios would result in such dramatic change that it would harm the place we all love. Can you reassure us that you will not be looking to exceed the amount of growth prescribed by the government housing formula?
Well, I've got a fairly long answer, James, which I'll email to you. But I mean, essentially, the evidence that we've published does start to shape how much growth there is capacity for. So I think the debate over the next few months, leading up to those stages, which I outlined in the overhead, is about what capacity there is, and that obviously is a matter for discussion, because resident views and the community's view really matters. So the national policy still, even without the planning reforms, has still got some fairly scary and not very clearly constructed ways of calculating how much housing should be supplied. So yeah, we've got a lot of things to bring together in terms of making that assessment of how much housing will be needed. And we do need to meet certain requirements, as you know, James, otherwise the inspectors come to call. And we really did suffer from having a 4-year delay, largely way outside the control of us and South Cambs with the inspector on the last occasion. So, so yeah, at the moment, the government numbers say that we should at least have a minimum growth option, but I'll forward you the fuller answer, James, and I'm very happy to meet up and discuss that, including with Katie Thornborough and with Stephen. So I'll forward that fuller answer. It goes on for about most of a page. So that will give you, I think, a full answer to that. But I hope, James, and I hope all of the people who started to look at the documentation are able to come along on the 2nd of December, as well as I'm sure we can have less formal meetings, and if Cambridge PPF or FECRA or other people want to organise a discussion, then officers and peak councillors will be very happy to come along and contribute to that. Whilst we can't meet in person, we can certainly have targeted discussions on different aspects. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. There was a follow-up question from Councillor Dryden, but before we come back, if we have time, I'd like to take another resident's voice. So Peter Lansov asking, how do we persuade people to use less water? We use 140 litres a day, but in Denmark only 80. I'm not sure if it's a question of persuasion or regulation, but I don't know whether Lewis or Stephen, whether you feel able to answer that.
Well, planning is an interesting concept. It applies to new development. It doesn't have any power to tell people in the wider community how to behave. But I do think that we need to be more water efficient anyway as part of reducing carbon emissions. So I think there must be opportunities, and that's a discussion, Peter, to be had with the water companies. I think we do need to share an ambition to cut abstraction. So there needs to be a discussion with the regulators and with the water companies about that, in particularly South Cambridgeshire. And we need to look at water efficiency. Some people talk about offset, i.e. some of the new developers contributing to the greater water efficiency of those of us who've already got homes. That may play a small part, but I think there's some fairly big issues in the document that Stephen referenced in terms of water strategy, and the natural environment, which you care passionately about, Stephen, and the CAM is a clear element in that. So we're reaching some kind of green lines, blue lines, red lines on some of the issues, and I just think that helps shape what the capacity is for growth in the next period, as well as meet the needs of affordable housing and of the housing that's still to be built within the local plan, and what level is identified as part of the next stages of consultation.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Stephen, again, for also publishing a link to the Council's response to the Government White Paper, if people are interested in following that up. A question from Nazaruddin again about whether there's any plans to increase police funds. Again, that's outside of the council's kind of remit, but I don't know whether, Lewis, you want to kind of comment on police resourcing in order to have public more quickly response.
Well, we've got, I mean, I haven't covered issues in that area, but I'm extremely concerned that recent statements talk about Cambridge having an inquiry point and not a police station, and we will be continuing to campaign for a proper police station. And there was absolutely no consultation before the police announced that they were cutting police community support officers. So what we're determined to press for, and there will be an election for whoever's going to be the Police and Crime Commissioner from next May, is that we keep neighbourhood policing, and that at the moment my concern is that there isn't really any, we're missing a link. We've got an acting Police and Crime Commissioner, but I'm not noticing really any challenge to the police over resourcing. So yeah, we cannot afford to have cuts in policing, given that we've got major issues of drugs, we've got other policing issues, and they've had to respond, and rightly have contributed to keeping people safe and to following up breaches of just common sense in the epidemic. So we need the resources. We need an effective police station in the city. The City Council also works in partnership with our local police, and we just need visibility in the policing, and the police know that that's the way to sort out crime and keep crime levels low, which thankfully in this city generally they are. So we need to have that dialogue, and we hope that the election campaigns as to who should be the Police and Crime Commissioner, albeit that that's a bit of a mixed up role, will nevertheless have a really good focus on the resourcing of policing really does matter and how the money is spent.
Okay, so with 3 minutes to go, the comments from Rachel Talbot from the Citizens Advice Bureau and James Leford again, which I think just both emphasise, they're not questions, they emphasise the importance of the partnership between the community, community organisations and the council. And I think, as Lewis has said earlier, we could achieve so much more when we work together, and that's a really, really helpful, both of those points. The last question.
And Rachel, I don't know if you were also asking to get more involved, but just drop me an email if there's anything you want to chat about. I'm really happy to do that.
So the last question that is a question, so it slightly goes back to the previous kind of issue, Councillor Dryden's follow-up question about won't the water issues have to be dealt with before any major planning developments can go ahead. Sorry, and then his kind of follow-up to that was, if I can find it, which I can't. Oh, thank you for your answers. Won't building on green belts and big open spaces make the water issues a lot worse?
Have you got any thoughts on that, Stephen? I mean, I think the I showed that typography of the different types of places where we already are approving within the existing local plan different development, whether that's on the edge of Cambridge or in new settlements or by having using up bits of space in the city. And I think the same applies to water as applies to carbon. So I think we're effectively going to be quantifying in considerable detail the impacts of each individual development, Stephen. So if there's a major development, it will be carefully assessed for its water impacts, its landscape, its environmental impacts, but particularly a much stronger and clear assessment on its carbon emissions. Do you want to add anything, Stephen?
I think that's right, Lewis. And obviously, one of the things that I would encourage you to read the water report. It's a really interesting explanation because conversely, in some cases for water management, surface water management, the report concludes that actually, rather than piecemeal development, you can achieve better and more integrated water systems, for, a bit like allowing you to recycle grey water and so on in some of the larger sites than you can in terms of perhaps more dispersed growth options. So it's not, there isn't in a single typology of growth that is perfect. Some offer benefits over others, but I don't think in terms of water supply side that greenbelt or green spaces have any specific additional harm from a water supply side. Picking up on the points that Lewis has highlighted, there are some really important things around encouraging everybody to just value water more and use it more appropriately. And I think, you know, we'd echo that, the comments that we've seen in the chat around that. I'm very keen to try and work to help achieve that objective.
Well, and James has underlined the community partnership and I just urge people just to spend a bit of time looking at the documents that have been listed on the site. And I think it's assisted by the way that the covering page just helps people in. Katie Thornborough's also said, raised the fact that we are going to do some water environment awareness work and just get people to be much more aware of what the impacts are there. So, if I might just close the session, I'd just like to thank you all for coming. I do hope that you've gained some knowledge, and obviously we're very happy if you've got further questions to answer them. We'll be putting up the presentation on the website along with the written answers to the questions that we got in advance. We can't sort out any of the problems, whether it's homelessness, climate change, biodiversity, the planning issues, unless it's done as a partnership. I just think we're fortunate with the number of people who are on this call that are committed to Cambridge, but also are challenging us. I mean, it has to be a lively relationship on these issues if we're to get to the right solutions. We wouldn't be where we are through a very difficult 8 months if it wasn't for that partnership, and also the work of the staff of the council, and a brief mention for councillors, because I know that locally across the wards there's an awful lot of work being put into the food hubs and into supporting the networks. So we are still in difficult times. There is no easy, quick route out. And I'm conscious that a number of charities, and like Arthur Rank, and a number of people are having to rethink and do things differently. And it's not easy, but we want to come out of this and continue to do all of the work that we've been doing in partnership on tackling poverty and on homelessness. And I do think that we're achieving good results working together. So thank you for all your questions, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue. And please do email us if you've got further questions that you want to ask or suggestions. And as Anna said, we are continuing to look at the generosity of businesses and others in terms of further help, in addition to the council putting its money into helping the people who are in greatest need, and continuing, as Nikki's asked, the work of the food hubs. So I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you for sharing your time and for all your questions. And the work goes on. We're a great city. We've got to keep working on tackling the challenges that we all face over the next year and more. So good night, everybody, and look forward to talking to you further. A little bit of a virtual wave, and we will be seeing you all in different places over the next few months, also online in such forums. So look after yourself, look after people that need some help, and we will continue to work to keep people safe and to help those who need us the most. Good night.